Right now, you're listening to the Azeem Digital Asks podcast, the podcast where I, Azeem, talk to some of the top marketers in the industry, find out everything about them, how they got to where they are today, and more importantly, sharing some really useful marketing tips that will help everybody listening to this become better marketers. Stay tuned for another great episode. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Azeem Digital Asks podcast. I am super excited for this one. I have an incredible guest who he will give himself a proper introduction, but my introduction for this guy is that he is the head of content at Traject. He's got a super awesome, brilliant podcast called the Agency Ahead podcast. And although he won't admit it, I have it on good authority that episode 57 of his podcast is probably the best podcast episode of all time. So you should definitely check that out. My guest is the brilliant Garrett Sussman. Garrett, welcome to the show, buddy.
Oh man, Azeem, that's an interesting. How do you start these episodes without people just bursting out laughing? You have the greatest intros of these podcasts ever. Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome, man. I will PayPal you that $50 later on. So look, let's get right into it. As you know, we always start with a random question, and mine for you is that you have to delete every app off your smartphone. You can only keep 3. Which 3 and why?
Ooh, that's tough. That's a tough one because well, the big question is work slash like living your life versus like entertainment. And I gotta admit, the first two are kind of easy. I would go with Spotify because I am a music file, what sonophile, whatever it is. I love my music, so Spotify would be one. Number two would probably be Twitter. I am on Twitter a little too much. I don't participate enough, but Twitter would be the go-to. And then when it comes to like the work life and what like the adult version of myself needs to do, is it my banking app or is it my email? Um, I don't love email, but you need email and you need money. I'm gonna say email. I feel like I'm gonna say email, my email app.
Oh, that would not be one of my 3. I don't even have an answer for this, but I was like, yeah, Spotify, get on board, need music. Bank, can live without it. Not that I'm like flush with
Hmm.
money, it's just I don't need a constant reminder of how broke I am. Twitter, yeah, definitely. But emails, nah, nah. You can DM me if like on Twitter
That's
if
a
it's
good call. That's
urgent.
a good call. I should have gone with Reddit.
Yeah, that's a great shout. So, for anybody who has been living under a rock, do you want to tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself and give yourself a proper introduction?
Oh man, I'm one of those Americans across the pond. I am a geek when it comes to marketing, SEO, content. I'm much more of a content focused. I love myself a good graphic novel, a good movie. Watch a little too much Netflix, and I love iced coffee. I've been drinking coffee way too much all my like I'm hoping there's no like negative health impacts when I get, later in life, but there probably will be. I drink too much coffee.
So I've been thinking like we've got a lot in common. Love this guy to bits. Up until you said iced coffee, cannot get on board with
No?
that. Not for
Ah,
me. Nah. I've tried it before. It's yeah.
fair. You might not have found the right iced coffee. In fairness, I hate most iced coffee, but the ones that I love, I'm obsessed with. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm with you. There's a lot of bad iced coffee out there. But what are you, tea, hot coffee? What do you do?
Yeah, I'm a tea person. Like I prefer like lattes.
Hmm.
But that's basically just like milk with a bit of coffee,
Yep.
isn't it really? Maybe that's why I don't like coffee. I like the smell of coffee, but not the taste. This is not a coffee podcast. This is about marketing, so we will get into it. So when did you realize that this was going to be the career for you? When did you think I'm really going to get into this?
It's interesting. Gosh, it's been 10, 11 years ago. I moved out to Silicon Valley. My obsession was I wanted to work for a startup. Originally, did not necessarily know I was going to end up in marketing, but I got a job in customer support at a small startup in San Francisco. Was obsessed with the culture, was obsessed with the idea of building something. And as I, worked in that business, I had two routes that I could go between. It was either product or marketing. Those were kind of my options. And I have this kind of creativity that I've wanted to, like I said earlier, I'm into content, and so I wanted this outlet to be able to create in a professional capacity, and so I was fortunate to get an opportunity. The company was 99 Design, so a graphic design marketplace, and moved from the support team and sales team to the marketing team doing PR early on, and just fell in love with creating, distributing, and sharing great content.
Awesome. Literally, you mentioned about Netflix earlier on. Already, that sounds like it would be a great Netflix program that I would love to watch. It's a whole Silicon Valley dream. Love that. Like, so if you could go back to right that very beginning with every bit of information that you've got now, what advice do you think that you'd give to yourself on day one?
Get into SEO. I it's really funny. Not that it was an afterthought, but I am obsessed. I love SEO. I think it's so important to marketing, especially content. And I wish I had more interest. Maybe it wasn't marketed to me well at the time. It was something that our company did. We outsourced it to a freelancer, and then she ultimately became the head of SEO. But I wish I was like introduced to it properly back then, because I now wish that I had 10 years of SEO under my belt as opposed to, getting really into it in the last 5.
That's an interesting answer. I think there's a common sort of misconception about SEO is that it's a nice thing to have when really it's something that you should probably like consider as a need rather than, a nice little add-on. Why do you think that is? Why do you think people don't really give it the attention and the love that it deserves?
Well, I think with marketing, and maybe this is a reality, but there's always feels like more of a focus on advertising. Um, the history of marketing was like you were speaking to your audience, it was not a conversation. And, I blame HubSpot. I love HubSpot, but with the whole inbound marketing, content marketing sort of revolution of our industry, I think finding a way, and the way that people interact with the internet and with marketing is much more of a inbound buyer's journey, can be effective and it can be cost effective. And so SEO naturally is a massively important element of having an inbound strategy. And so I've always kind of found myself guided towards the inbound marketing strategy more than advertising. And people, are embracing that, but more need to continue always. I'll always evangelize SEO.
Yeah, yeah, good stuff. Fully on board with that. Really like that. It definitely sounds like some of the things that you've picked up along the way. Leads me nicely to my next question is what sort of things have you picked up from your working career that you'd like to share with the listeners and think that they would benefit from?
I think one of the biggest things, and I've dabbled in code a little bit as well, and it's this idea that there are ideas of how to do things, but there's not always the right way to do things. It took me a long time to realize that you need to always be asking questions. You always need to be trying and experimenting and figuring things out, because it's not always point A to point B. You can go, in a curve, in a straight line, but there are other ways to get there. And so if you're the type of person who thinks that things have to be done the right way, I think that can actually be a limitation in your career sometimes.
Yeah, could not agree with you more. It's one of the things that I have shouted about from the rooftops, and I share with people who join my team. Literally, ask questions from day one. Don't just accept that you only get from A to B in one way. When you start like thinking outside of the box and wondering how and why things work, really helps you push things on. So I think a lot of value to be had in that answer. Very inspirational. And speaking of inspiration, I wanted to ask you who has been a big inspiration for you in the industry? Who did you look up to? Who do you look up to now?
Oh man, I there are so many people, especially when you're engaging in our, speaking of Twitter, our Twitter community. There are so many interesting, cool people with great ideas out there. And I am interested across the various arms of marketing. So whether it's content, I love what Andy Crestadina at Orbits Media does. I love what Ross Hudgens at Siege does. I'm a big fan of the distribution concepts that Ross Simmons of Foundation does. Love Moz. I love the whole team at Moz, whether it was Rand Fishkin initially, Miriam Ellis. In local is where I've like really got into SEO when I started with Great Us about 5 years ago. So like Mike Blumenthal, Joy Hawkins. Um, there are so many talented people. Most recently, getting into Python and technical SEO. I love the whole Deep Crawl team. I love Hamlet Batista, Lily Ray. See, I could go. There's so many people who they're all creating great content, and you get inspired to, whether it's educating others or trying out things that work for your own, businesses that you're working on. I know you're probably we're just looking for a few, but I could probably like list like 20 more, but I get very easily inspired.
It's your episode. You can share as many as you want. The only thing that I'll say is when this comes out, you're definitely going to have to tag everybody and say, listen.
See, you set me up there, and I'll be honest. Like part of the reason when I started my podcast, like for completely selfish reasons, is I wanted to talk to all these people who I just thought was awesome. Is like there's no better excuse than getting people in a conversation than having them on your podcast.
Absolutely. I'm going to grill you about the podcast later on.
Ha!
Don't worry. I've got lots of questions about it. Okay, so tell me a little bit more about the role that you do now and some of the challenges you've got and what you're doing to overcome them.
Yeah, it's been a crazy ride at Traject. So Traject is this suite of digital marketing tools that covers a few different types of marketing. So Grade Us is online reviews and reputation for local SEO. Fan Booster does social media. Sife is business analytics dashboarding. Authority Labs does rank tracking. And so my role as head of content is to plan out the content strategy across these different brands and Traject to really appeal to primarily an agency audience, but also anyone who needs these tools to improve their own marketing. So, I work with a group of freelancers and a small in-house team to uh, create content that's inbound. I work with our advertising specialists to make sure our ads and copy look good, building the website. It's like that T-shaped marketer type of responsibility to really, with our key goals are driving free trials, driving new customers, driving traffic to the website.
Yeah. So you sound like a very busy man. So thank you very much for taking the time out to join me. Let's talk about COVID then. It's Lockdown podcast. I always ask about COVID, not personally, of course, but professionally. How did that impact the business? How did that impact you? And how have you responded?
Yeah, it mostly, out of all the software tools that I mentioned, it really impacts local SEO and small businesses, especially early on when different, geographies and governments were shutting down. And I know, in the UK, there's lockdowns happening as well, and it really impacts local communities. And so when it came to online reviews in the local space, everyone, when it comes to SaaS, is tightening their budgets. And so one of the things that I loved about the company that I work for, it was our priority to work with our customers, to be understanding of their situations, that they might not have had the budget that it normally did. And if it meant like having to put their subscriptions on pause, or leave and come back, or reduce their pricing early on, that was something that we worked with our customers. And I think that's really important, especially in 2020, is to have that relationship with your customers and be sympathetic and empathetic to what they're going through. It was a major change. And so, from a content standpoint, you have to be cognizant of the tone, the messaging that you put out there, and be understanding of what people that you're talking to are going through, because it's really hard to understand and put yourself in someone else's shoes. And I think that this whole experience kind of forces you to be hyper aware of what you're putting into the interwebs.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant answer there. It sounds like you've had to do a lot of I'm not going to use the word pivot in a business sense because I hate it, but a lot of changing, a lot of learning, which leads me very nicely to my next question. So, how do you continue to do that? How are you learning and gaining knowledge? What are you doing to stay on top or in line with everything that's happening in the industry right now?
There's so many resources that I value and appreciate, and a lot of them depend on what I'm working on. Twitter is always my biggest resource. I even have like a local search list of Twitter experts who I follow and always check almost religiously to see if there are any updates for local and how it might be impacting reviews. Because early on, reviews were actually shut down for Google, and that impacted our business as well. In addition to that, local search forum and the Google support forums are all my local kind of resources. And then in terms of my SEO and marketing, I'm a big fan and subscriber to Traffic Think Tank, which is Nick Eubanks and Matthew Howell Barbary and Ian Howells. They run a great Slack group with an amazing community of people who are very supportive and helpful for specific questions because SEO is a black box. Um,
Yeah.
that's pretty much like Twitter's my biggest one though, is just being part of that community.
Awesome. Right, let's switch tack a little bit. A lot of positivity. We're going to have to bring it down temporarily and talk about the bad side of stuff, the negativity. So let's talk about failure briefly. In the last 12 months, COVID aside, what would you say has been the biggest failure for you? And why did you think that it happened?
Yeah, biggest failure, and that is a tough one. And I think we have a culture of not wanting to talk about failure, but it happens to everyone.
Yeah.
I would say like one of the biggest failures was we were doing um, a migration and we a website migration. We were updating the Fan Booster brand, and it was really hard to see the organic traffic tank for a few of the highly successful URLs that we had built. It's a long process. So it's still early on, and usually you have to wait 3 months to see the traffic come back. But right now, it feels like a failure. It feels like a failure when you invest so much in your content, and then you have to do a migration like that, and the results temporarily are completely destroyed, and there's no guarantee that what you're doing will ultimately work, and no one's going to explain it to you. So I don't know if that really truly counts as a failure, but it feels like it in the moment.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of noise on Twitter every time a migration happens, whether it's both a good one or a bad one. There's always stuff to be reading and following up on. Let's move on. Tell me what is in your in tray, proverbially. What are you working on right now?
Oh man, Q1, right? Like basically, well, it's interesting in the SaaS world, and as you have more data, you can start to get the sense of, not that there's necessarily seasonality, but when budgets are approved and people are spending money, historically we see January is a big month for adoption. With B2B SaaS, it's tricky because it's a long sales cycle. Sure, there are people who, will try your free trial out, and at any given moment, you're always bringing new customers, but you need to be ready for when January hits the ground. That's been my experience the last 4 years. So right now, we are making sure that all of our campaigns, all of our content, all of our processes are ready to go as we hit January 1st, and we know people are going to be looking.
Yeah, I imagine it's probably going to be very different to the past couple of years that you've done this cycle. I'm tempted to ask you what you're doing differently, but we can't give away all your secrets, I'm afraid.
And you've got to be somewhat cautiously optimistic. I mean, in the context of COVID, we were told that the winter was going to get worse before it got better, but there's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. We're starting to hear signs of vaccines coming, and you know, at the very least, it says we will at some point get back to whatever the new normal is. It's not going to be like it was, but we're going to get back to some element of normalcy. And it's important, I think, to try to be optimistic and be ready to seize the moment when we are on that precipice.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think I might start adding in a question to future episodes saying, and what month of 2021 do you think you'll give your first hug to someone?
It's a good question. I mean, my wife and I were talking about when are we going to feel comfortable going to a music concert again. We miss our concerts, and like even when you're able to, I mean, I don't know when we'll feel comfortable going, let alone a hug. That's a great question for the podcast.
Yeah, I think I read something recently over here. Ticketmaster will say in 2021 you have to prove you've had a clean COVID test or that you've had the vaccine to enter the concert, which is different, definitely different. But yeah, we won't talk about that anymore. The next question is a bit of a strange one for me because you are already a podcaster, so you probably got loads up your sleeves. But pretend we've swapped roles. You get to ask yourself anything. Free forum for you to say anything, within reason, of course. What would you ask yourself that I haven't asked you already?
Maybe I would ask myself, what aspect or type of marketing do you want to learn that you do not consider yourself an expert in, but aspire to become more knowledgeable in 2021?
Ooh, go on then.
And yeah, for me, I am a data geek and I want to become better at utilizing data to make better informed decisions. I think I'm pretty good at it with a lot of the basics, whether it's looking at Google Analytics, using some of these great tools out there like SEMrush or Ahrefs. But I really want to up my SQL and Python game, being able to take a large amount of data and use it for research to surface incredible marketing insights, both internally, but also for research that would, help our customers. Like one of our tools, Traject Data, has is an API that pulls in, SEO SERP results from Google, and you can look at like millions of keywords and you have all this data, but I don't have the skills yet to be able to write a query to surface exactly what I'm looking for, and then send out that brilliant research paper that we're all like, oh my gosh, there it is, there's the insight that will take the industry by storm.
Yeah, definitely. Anybody who I speak to, like of that university level age in my family, I'm always saying, look, do a degree in big data, you will not regret it. And they're like, oh, it's just boring. I was like, honestly, it's the future. I used to work with a guy who was like king of SQL, and I would just always try and throw him off. I would just randomly ask him questions like, right, I want to know in March 2016 how many people in the north of the country converted from their mobile. He would just be like, give me 30 seconds, furiously bash away on the keyboard. Boom, there's your answer. I was like, but this is like unreal. I just needed a
See, I'm a
brain.
geek. You say that, and I'm like, that is so cool. I want to know how to do that.
I was watching him type away his query, and I was like, to me, it just literally sounds like he's just typing away a lot of nonsense at the time because I didn't have a clue. But when he came back with the answers, I was like, what? This is unreal. And he was like, yeah, I can even split it up by time of day, day of week. I was like, what? Give me your brain immediately.
And it's so interesting too. It's like, when if you're not in the mindset to learn that stuff in the moment, your eyes just glaze over and you don't pay attention. But then, 3 months, 5 years later, all of a sudden it's important to you, and you're like, I want to soak up all the knowledge. I want to know it all now. I wish I knew it yesterday. But if you're not in the mind space for it, you're not going to learn anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we come to the end of the podcast, my friend, I've got the opportunity now to grill you a little bit more about your podcast. So tell us all about it, how it came about, the idea behind it, and more importantly, your work rate, as I've mentioned to you when we're not recording, is just unreal. You're constantly pushing out new content. So tell me about it. What's your secret? I need to know it all.
It's fun, man. And it's like the podcasting. You get nervous, or I get nervous, ahead of every episode. But I enjoy talking to people. I enjoy talking about marketing. The inspiration was I started actually right around March when COVID was starting to happen, and realizing that we couldn't just do the same thing that we were always doing. We had to try something new. And I've been meaning to do a podcast, and I don't know why, but I was just, I was like, okay, today's the day we're starting up a podcast. And uh, there were so many people I wanted to talk to. So I just started reaching out. I just started reaching out to people, and I was like, hey, I'm doing a podcast. We've got an agency audience. I think you would be perfect. I just want to, shoot the breeze and talk marketing with you. Are you happy to come on? And, you know, 9 times out of 10, our community, our industry is really, really nice, or at least maybe it's just me, the people I've interacted with, but everyone has been genuinely awesome that I've had on. And you know, I rarely get the cold shoulder or the blow off. And so, and I don't consider myself, very visible in in the industry yet, like always trying to be, and growing your own personal brand. But so many people, didn't question it. They're just like, yeah, Garrett, let's throw time on the calendar and start chatting. And I have a great freelance writer, Rainey Hudson, who writes up my show notes, and we use Transistor, which is a great platform. And it's with anything. Once you get the processes and the rhythm of it, it becomes less and less work each time.
Yeah, absolutely. I love your podcast and I always try and keep up, but when I add one, another one comes out and I'm like, this guy's work rate is insane. So the last thing I'll ask you about the podcast is if somebody was still unsure and needed a reason why should they listen to the podcast?
Well, it covers everything. No matter what type of marketing that you're interested in, your eyes will be open because these guests are fantastic. They all have really interesting insights in terms of what they specialize in. It's not always like just inbound marketing or just advertising. It runs the gamut. The other thing is, it's really important to me to have diverse representation in my guests. So it's not just always, someone with a massive following on social media. I really work hard to make sure that I have different genders, ethnicities, perspectives, religions. Not that we talk about religion on the podcast, it is about marketing, but it's really important to have a variety of perspectives represented. And I take pride in all of the amazing voices that we've had on there. And we talk about those issues in the marketing world, and continually improving diversity and representation in our industry, which has made a lot of progress, but we still have a long ways to go. And so if you listen to that, at the end of each podcast, I always ask my guests, like, what's your right now cause to, make the world a better place in the context of all this bad stuff that's happening in the world. And all of the various causes that my guests provide is just inspirational. So that's why you should listen.
Couldn't have sold it any better myself. Brilliant. Sadly, we are coming to the end of the podcast, but I always ask my guests if you do listen to music when you need to get in that zone, super productive mode, what is in your ears?
Oh man, I'm a hipster. I'm an unabashed hipster, Azeem. I only listen to music that no one else has ever heard of. No, I on Spotify, I'm obsessed. I created like this list where like I'll lit their discovery playlist. You ever use Spotify's discovery playlist?
Yeah,
It's
always.
brilliant. The algorithm, like, it always genuinely brings on great music that I never heard. So from there, I learned the Mowgli's, who actually recently broke up and broke my heart. Jukebox the Ghost is a band that I love. Air Traffic Controller. Um, I can go on. Fits in the Tantrums. But if you don't know, man, like, it's so funny how like a band name, it's like if you have no frame of reference, you just hear it, it hits your ear, and you're like, well, I have no concept of what they sound like. But it's indie rock, indie alternative, indie pop is my jam.
Nice. Yeah, it's one of the ways that I, well, discover new music, but I also like the fact that when I'm browsing for stuff like that for myself, there's just a handy way to exclude certain artists. Like, I don't like this artist, or play me less of this. And like you said, the algorithm is absolutely bang on. But algorithms we can talk about on another episode. This is unfortunately the end. We could talk for absolutely ages, but for me, it's like quite late on a Friday evening, and it's probably like midday or something for you. For you, you've still got the rest of your day. Where can people find out more about you? How can they get in touch with
I
you?
admire you doing it. You care. This podcast is so good, Azeem. I appreciate you having me on. If you want to find me online, I am on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. On Twitter, it's Garrett Sussman, all one word. Well, two names, but smushed together. So GarrettSussman.
Awesome. Thank you very much for joining me on the show, my friend. And as always, the last word on this episode is all yours. So take it away.
Thank you so much for having me. I would just say to everyone out there right now is be empathetic. We don't know what anyone else is going through in their lives. And so do good, pay it forward, be kind, and always assume the best intentions of others. Thank you for having me, Azeem. You rock.
So that was another great episode in the bag. I'm really enjoying hearing from some brilliant people in this industry. If you enjoyed this podcast, please follow me on Spotify. Please leave a rating on Apple Podcasts or whichever platform you are using. Tell a friend to tell a friend, and hopefully see you for the next episode.